Welcome to the Powertune Digital Getting Started video. This video is going to run you through setting up the dash for the first time, how to connect to your ECU, general use of the dash, and how to work your way through the settings menus and different options. Now this video does assume that you've already got the dash powered on and connected to your car. If you haven't been able to do that yet, refer to our first tutorial video, which details the installation of the dash into the car. In order to get started, the first thing we're going to need to do is get the dash connected to our ECU. Now, thanks to the guys at Vulcan Garage Australia, we do have a custom drop-in cluster here for an R33 Skyline. So we're just going to bench this one and run you guys through essentially what you would need to know and what you would need to do on day one when you receive the dash to ensure you can get up and running nice and smoothly and start customizing your settings, changing your options, and doing all the things that you might like to do. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit on our central dash here, just so you guys have the best possible view of sort of what's going on. Now, when you first receive the dash, it's going to start up onto a screen that looks just like this one. Now, the first thing to note is that at any time you can swipe down from the top to get a control center here, which will allow you to increase and decrease the brightness as you go. Obviously, when you're filming, you may have noticed that having the screen brightness more towards the lower side is a little bit easier on the eyes and easier on the camera. So I'm going to keep it down for you guys as far as I can. Now, the first thing we'll need to do is scroll across to our settings menu. And this is the main settings area where we can sort of choose what kind of ECU we're connected with, how we want the dash to work, whether we want metric or imperial units, and all our different options like that. We can also see in the very middle here the software version number, and that one will be important if you're ever asking for technical support or if you ever need help from us. One of the first questions we will ask you is what software version are you running, and you can see that just in the middle of the main settings tab. So the one thing you may notice as well in the settings menu is we do have a range of tabs along the top, which allow you to access the different settings areas. Now, those different tabs are detailed in the user manual, and we will be covering some of those off in this video now. So in order to get started, the very first thing you'll need to do is press the startup button here up in the top right corner. The startup button are the main settings that the dash has when it boots up, and this is where we can choose the type of ECU that we've got, as well as the bit rate and the speed source. So first and foremost, if we touch on the startup daemon drop-down box, you'll see here we get a list of options, and we can also scroll through this list of options. So the first thing you'll need to do here is select the relevant ECU that you've got installed in your car. Once you've selected the ECU, the next thing you're going to need to set is the CAN bitrate. Now, the majority of aftermarket ECUs use a bitrate of 1 megabit. A lot of the standard and factory ECUs use 500 kilobits. Now, in our user manual, there is a table that details all the different ECUs and what bit rate you need to have set for them. But generally speaking, if you're on an aftermarket ECU, it's 1 megabit. If you are on a factory ECU, it's 500 kilobits. And of course, there are always exceptions to the rule. There are some aftermarket ECUs out there that don't run at 1 megabit. So make sure you refer to the table that's in our user manual. I will also clip it onto the screen for you now just for a few moments. The final drop-down option here is the speed source. So the dash will default to get your speedo reading from the ECU. However, if you're a customer that doesn't have a speedo signal wired up to your ECU and you're using GPS as your speed source, just simply select GPS here to set the dash to pull the speed source from the GPS module. Now, do note on this screen, when you set these settings, you must press apply afterwards to have the dash reboot and store and save the settings. If you do not press apply, the settings do not get stored and saved. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right, now that we have our ECU settings done, the next thing we're going to do is set up our Wi-Fi connection. This is going to allow us to get software updates and copy files across to the dash as well. All we'll need to do now is scroll across to the settings menu, and in the top right corner, we're going to press the network button. Now, it might take a second or two to load when you press that button, as it will be scanning all the available networks in the background. Now, once you get onto this page, you can, if you like, press the scan Wi-Fi button again. Typically, you shouldn't have to though. Set your Wi-Fi country and then touch on this Wi-Fi 1 drop-down box here. Now, in that list, you will see hopefully the Wi-Fi network that you're looking for. So find the Wi-Fi network for your home or your shop or wherever you are and select on that one. And then touch into the password 1 box here and enter in the Wi-Fi password for your network. Now I'm gonna pop in our shop Wi-Fi here. If you ever come down to our shop, you can use this password to steal our Wi-Fi. Press the now once you've typed in your password, press the button at the bottom right to close the keyboard, and then simply just press the connect Wi-Fi button. Now the dash will reboot. Now the dash will reboot when we press the connect Wi-Fi button. After the dash is finished rebooting, if we scroll back to settings and go back to the network tab in the top right corner, you'll see that we now have an IP address showing here. So the WLAN IP address for the iNet is 192.168.1.130. That's how we know the dash has been connected to the network, and that's the IP address we can use to talk to the dash from a device like a laptop if we wanted to copy over logos, boot images, track files, or whatever it might be. So that's how we set up the Wi-Fi connection, and at any time with Wi-Fi connected, you can press the update button on this page here to update the software on the dash. Note that when you do press that button, you won't be able to use the dash for anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes as it completes that update for you. And so now we've completed connecting our Wi-Fi network. Okay, now that we have our ECU connected, our Wi-Fi has been connected, and the base settings have all been put into the dash, it's time to really start customizing the dash and learning how we can change the layouts, how we can add our own layouts, and really get familiar with the user interface. So, the first thing to quickly note, there's one tab we did not cover off in the main settings area, and that is the dash select tab up at the top left. Now you can see here we currently have 2 dashboards selected, user dashboard 1 and user dashboard 2. Here we can change how many active dashboards we have selected. We can have between 1 and 4. Keep in mind, for each dashboard that you add about 3.5 seconds of loading time to the dash's start time. So when you have 2 active dashes selected, the dash will boot up from completely powered off to completely on and ready to go in about 11 to 12 seconds. If you up that to 4 active dashboards, you will increase the boot time to around 16 to 17 seconds. So do be mindful if you are increasing the number of active dashboards. Now, what we have here are a range of different choices that we can make between the dashboards that are going to show up when the dash starts. Now we have user dash 1, 2, and 3. They are going to be the main ones that you use. There are some other ones here, some preset ones, as well as some diagnostic ones that you can pick from. Another great example would be our drag timer. So if I was to quickly change the active dashboards to 3, touch on dash 3 here, and then go and change that to the drag timer. Oops, I just missed there. So now that I've got that set to the drag timer, if I now swipe back, not only do I have an extra dash, but the dash is now set to the dash that I've told it, and I could press the start staging tree to start staging if I wanted to. Obviously I have no way to make it move at the moment, so it's not going to do anything. For now, I'm going to set that one back to 2. So when the dash first starts, when you first get into your car, this is likely the layout that you'll get when the dash ships out of the box. And what we can do to start customizing this is simply double tapping. I'm going to do it from this side just to make it a bit easier to see. So as you can see there, when I double tap on the layout, we get what we call the layout menu. Now the layout menu is going to allow you to modify, clear, import, add and remove elements from the layout on the fly as you see fit. It's very, very important to get familiar with this menu, particularly how it works and some of the intricacies of it. When this menu is on the screen, you can touch anywhere between the buttons to simply move it around. So if I wanted to modify some gauges on this side, I would obviously just move it out of the way and so on and so forth. Now, the number one important rule to understand about how the dash works is this little square menu itself. When the menu is open, everything across all layouts becomes completely unlocked. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's have a working example. If we look over on the right-hand side, we can see our water, our oil, and oil readings. Now, whilst the menu is open, if I put my finger on any of that and touch it, it's going to start moving around. The reason it's going to start moving around is because I have this menu open, because I have not closed it. So the important rule of thumb is when we want to modify things or make changes, we initially open the menu, but then we will immediately close it. Now, to give you guys a bit of a more easier working example, I'm going to quickly clear that and re-import it. Don't worry about learning this step as you go, as I will come back to importing later. So I'm purely just doing this to make it a little bit easier. Okay, so if we were to double tap, we open the layout menu. And you can see there, so that's a great example where I mistapped and I didn't want to touch on that, but because I've got this layout screen open, I missed it and got the wrong thing that I didn't want. So I'm going to move the menu out of my way now so I don't accidentally grab it. I'll just put the needle back where it was. Now let's say I want to modify boost over here. So one thing that we do is the boost gauge is actually set to the channel map. It's not actually set to the channel boost. And you might be sitting there wondering why on earth would we do that? And the main reason is because far more cars broadcast data on the map channel than they actually do over the boost channel. However, when map is selected, that means the gauge will show atmospheric pressure. So when you're sitting there at idle doing nothing, the gauge will give you a reading of 14 PSI. And of course, some customers get a little bit perplexed about why that is. Now, let's say we do have an ECU that broadcasts a boost reading, and so we would like to change that. All we need to do again is double tap to open our layout menu. Now, in the case of text elements, which is what these are, and I will cover off what that means in just a moment, we need to actually select the number next to the gauge and not the gauge itself. So if I was to double tap on 0, I'm now going to get another gauge that will allow me, another menu that will allow me to start modifying that gauge. Now, the important thing to remember is what I mentioned a few moments ago about keeping this menu closed, and I'm going to show you why this is so important. If I was to leave this menu open right now, as we previously, when this layout was first created, either by us or by yourself as the customer or someone you might have got it from, all these elements are being layered as they added, just like a cake. So you're starting with the base, and then every gauge, every text element, everything that you're doing is being added on top like a layer. So now that I've got my gauge menu open, let's say I want to try and move that to the middle of the screen so I can actually access all of the values that have come up in that little menu. If I touch on it and try and grab it, you'll see that I'm actually not able to do that. Or if I try and move it, you'll see that I accidentally grabbed the 0 next to IAT instead of actually grabbing the gauge that I wanted. And this all comes down to the layering. So you can see there, you can get it, but even now when I'm trying to move other things, it's still not letting me tap directly where I want. Now, this is all because this menu has been left open. So let me show you a better working example. If I clear that off, I'll quickly import it again. The key to everything is always keeping the menu closed. So the way I would do this is double tap to get my gauge menu. I then double tap on the boost number to get that gauges menu. However, then I immediately close the first menu that comes up. By closing that menu, it relocks everything back in place except this gauge menu, which I can now just move around the screen and I'm not accidentally tapping other stuff that I don't want. And this is one mistake or issue that customers do have quite a lot, is it's when I'm trying to modify a gauge, I'm always tapping on things I don't want. And the simple answer to that, it's because you've left the menu open. So very simply put, we're going to open our menu, which unlocks the layout for us. We're then going to double tap on the gauge that we want. We immediately press close on the menu to lock it all back in place. And then we can easily select our menu and move it around the screen, and we're not accidentally tapping on other stuff. Where, say, for example, I wanted to change, oil temp or oil pressure, I can sort of move that one there, and then I need to close that one out of the way, and then I need to tap on that one, and then I need to move it. And it all sort of gets very complicated. I was kind of doing some really precision touching there, so it didn't happen too much. But the bottom line is you want to keep that menu closed as often as you can. Now, an important thing to understand with the layouts is that the different types of elements work in different ways. So as you could see with the text elements, when we double tap and we get the layout menu, there's a drop down box here at the top right corner. So as you saw earlier, when I've got this menu open, I can double tap on anything in the layout to modify it. I can also add new stuff though. So if we hit this drop down box in the top right corner, this will lead to our channel list. Now let's say I would like to show something additional that I'm not currently being shown on the screen at the moment now. Let's just say we'll go brake pressure. Once we've got our channel source selected here, we can add it as a square, we can add it as a bar, we can add it as a round gauge, or we can add it as a text image, or an image or a text item. Now to show you guys some working examples, they are an example of round gauges. Obviously, the layout in front of you is also a round gauge, and it's using a combination of text and image elements. And this one is only using square gauges. They are obviously rectangles, but we call them squares. So these elements work in different ways. Now, what do I mean by that? So as you saw on the previous layout, when we want to modify something that's been added as text elements, as this one is, you could see that we had to modify the channel data and the channel name separately. And the reason for that is because the word boost is simply just a text element where it's been written as boost and dropped there. And then the image here, which happens to be, the text again on this one, the text has then been linked to a channel, which then pulls the channel data. So in the case of text, when we want to modify the gauge, we only have to double tap on the number to get access to the channel. However, as you'll see with the square gauges, we don't have to do that. We simply just double tap for the layout menu, double tap on any gauge, and the gauge is just one. Both the title and the channel data are linked together. They are not separate individual elements like they are when we're adding just text elements, which is what the main dash that you've been working on or will receive out of the box is all created using text elements. It does not have any square or square gauges in it. Okay. What we're going to do now is cover off some of the customization options we have and how we can really get comfortable and familiar with using the layout creator. So what I've just quickly done, I've added user dashboard 3 to my active dashboards. And so I've given us another one here that we can play with. And I'm going to completely just clear it all out to 0 so we can start from scratch. So the way that I did that, by the way, was by double tapping. And then if you press clear, it will clear all the layout elements off the screen. The other thing you can then do is press background, and you can set your background picture here. So many of our dashes have a background picture that corresponds to the layout itself. So let me give you an example of that. If I was to set the background as config dash, we then get this background here, but there's no channel data on it. If we double tap, we press import, and then we change this drop-down box here to the text name that suits the background image we picked. So obviously the background picture we picked just before was config dash. So if we now select config dash in the import menu and we press load, you'll see that it loads through the corresponding gauge layout that is linked to that background picture. That one looks like it might need a small update. Once you've made any changes that you want to make, at any time you can double tap and press save. So I'm going to give you guys a better working example of the different gauge types. So we now have a blank background. And so again, what we do is double tap for the gauge menu. We then hit the drop down box in the top right corner. And in this case, I'll just choose something easy like boost. So we can now add that as a square gauge, which looks like so. We can add it as a bar gauge. We can add it as a round gauge. And then of course, we can add it as text. Now, when it's added as text, you will need to actually manually link it to a channel. The way that we'll do that is by double tapping on the text element. Of course, we close our menu, so we're not tapping on things we don't want. We move the gauge menu to where we need it. Now, as you can see here, the default channel that gets linked to text elements is the alternator light, purely because it's just at the top of the list. So double tap on that. We're going to scroll down and we're going to set this one to boost. And then we're going to go to use data source. And you can see there it's now changed to 0.00. So as the car starts building boost, that gauge will then change according to the channel as well. So the reason that we've added the text elements is just to purely give users a greater freedom over customization. Obviously, the square gauges, the title of the gauge, the bar, the box, the channel data is all linked. You cannot separate that out, so it creates a limitation on how much customization you can do. By having the text elements, you can simply just add text wherever you like. And then I can double tap on it. And then I close the menu. And then I'll relabel text element. To say boost. And close. And so now we have a bar gauge, 2 text elements, a square gauge, and a round gauge. And that gives you the basic concept of adding channels and the differences between the different square, bar, round, and text gauge types. So in summary, there's some fundamentals that we've covered off in terms of managing the layouts on the dash. So first and foremost, we double tap to get the layout menu. Then we can double tap on any gauge or channel to modify it in any way that we like. Always close the layout menu and then move your gauge menu around as you need to, so you can freely move it without accidentally tapping on other channels or elements that you might need. Again, when we're adding channels, we can add them as different types. We can add them as square gauges, we can add them as bar, round gauges, or we can add them as text elements. Anytime we double tap for this menu, we can press clear to clear our layout off, and then we can import to start over from scratch. We can use the background button at the bottom left to set background pictures or default RPM styles. And of course, anytime we make any changes that we want to keep, we must double tap and press save. Otherwise, when the dash reboots, the changes that you've made will not have been saved. Of course, if you guys ever have any questions or need any support, the best place to message us is either on Facebook, Instagram, or giving us a call. You can always send us an email or post on our owners group in Facebook as well. And we always aim to get back to everyone as quickly as we can, 7 days a week. Certainly hope you enjoy using your new Powertune Digital Dash, and thanks so much for becoming a customer.